We're going to talk about sewing pointe shoes. So first thing what you need is your elastic, which we'll talk about how we measure in a minute, your ribbons, we have scissors, thread. This is the thread that comes in a lot of those sewing kits, which is great. What I always use is dental floss. Works fantastic, a lot cheaper than this too. This is the needle that comes in those kits, and it's really thick and really long. It has a nice big eye for this thread, but I find them a little bit hard. I use one that's like just a little bit smaller and thinner, but it still has a nice big eye, so it's just easy to thread that through. But that's just personal preference. And then once we have everything cut and sewn, we use a lighter just to burn the edges of the ribbons so they don't fray. So first we'll talk about how we'll sew shoes for someone who's like fairly new to Pointe, probably at least your first year of Pointe. We're gonna crisscross our elastics on the shoe, kind of like, these are a little bit long, but just to see, kind of like that. Some flat shoes are sewn like that anyway. If you've been on Pointe for a while, I have them just sew a loop in the back. So for new to Pointe, I'm just gonna put this on my foot so you can see. The way you would measure is you would put this like in the back where your heel is, just like maybe about that much. So you give a little space to actually sew down, and then you're gonna stretch it about halfway up the shoe. And you want it to be tight, but not too tight, because this is what's gonna be like predominantly holding the shoe on. So you really wanna make sure that you're stretching as you're crossing, so it's nice and snug. And then that's the measurement that I have about there. And if you're crossing them, you're gonna need 4 pieces that size. So I always tell everybody when they go to the store to ask for extra elastic, because usually they don't give you enough to crisscross. If you're not gonna crisscross, you're just gonna do the same thing, but I'm gonna sew it a little bit further down the shoe so there's more support. And you're gonna cross it around your ankle, same thing, stretching it so it's nice and tight, and figure out how long you need it there, all the way back to the back, okay? So we're gonna thread our needle, and I always double my thread around just because I'm always nervous that it's gonna rip. So I'll get a nice long piece and cut it. And then you can tie a knot however you like to tie knots in your thread, but I double it over. And then the way that I tie a knot is I just loop it on the needle like that. This might be hard to see. I'm holding it like in a loop like that, and then I wrap it around the needle like 2 or 3 times, and then slide it down. If you have an easier way to do it, it really doesn't matter as long as there's a knot in the end. So again, this is the way we would sew them for somebody who's brand new to Pointe. So I'm gonna take the elastic, and I have like, I don't know, maybe about a 1/2 inch, a little bit more inside the shoe. And I'm gonna sew looking at the outside. And all that I do is from the inside, I usually do 5, maybe sometimes 6 little loops around. So I go right under this seam here. You wanna try to avoid going through this spot here, because this is where your drawstring is. And if you sew through the drawstring, they're not gonna be able to tighten it. So you wanna go underneath this seam, and then I just go only through the elastic on top. So not through this area here where the drawstring is. And I do that like 5 loops across. Okay, so that's done. And even if this was dental floss and this was white, you're not gonna see it at all. So we have all those stitches going from the bottom underneath the seam and then just through the elastic on top. And I'm gonna take it from the inside to make my knot. And the way I do it is I like to anchor this corner here. So I don't go all the way through the shoe. I just pick up like a little piece of the suede inside there. I don't know if you can see that. Yep. Yeah. And then through the elastic. And then I just make a knot by looping through here. And then looping through here. But however you make a knot, it doesn't matter. But I like to do it there so that this little side is nice and anchored down, otherwise it's gonna pull. And that's it. And continuing with this way for if it was somebody that's new to Pointe, you're gonna sew the other side on the exact same way. So from the back, you're just gonna have 2 loose elastic straps here. And then what I would do, I'm just gonna take that one out of the way. For your ribbons, you're gonna cut them into 4 equal pieces. So I folded in half. And cut. And I folded in half again. And half again, and cut again. So you have 4 equal pieces. And then the way to do the crisscross is I sew the ribbon and elastic down at the same time so that you don't have to sew them separately. But the way that I get my ribbon ready so that it doesn't fray is I fold it the end over twice, like that. And then you're gonna go about where the seam is, like sort of about halfway up the shoe. And I'm gonna put my ribbon down first, and then I'm gonna flip the elastic from the opposite side, right? Because you want it to crisscross over there. So ribbon down first, elastic on top. And then we're gonna sew that on, and then we'll do the other side. Put it down about halfway up the shoe. Most shoes, it's gonna be in front of this seam here. This one kind of, because it comes on a diagonal, it's a little bit further back, so I'm a little bit on top of the seam. But most shoes, you're gonna be in front of it. That just looks a little bit too far forward to me on this, so I'm gonna go back about here. Flip the elastic over, put it on top of the ribbon. And now, just like I did on the back when I tied the knot, how I didn't go all the way through the shoe, I'm gonna do that here. So I'm not gonna put the needle through all the way through to the other side of the shoe this way. I'm just gonna work, so you're not gonna see any stitches on the outside. I'm just going through the suede, through the ribbon, through the elastic. Yeah. And then I just kind of do like a whip stitch around. So same, through the suede, through the ribbon, through the elastic, and around. And again, through the suede, through the ribbon, through the elastic. And I just go all the way around the same way. And it really does not have to be perfect, just as long as it stays on. And then I like to tie 2 knots. I go here, through this loop, and through the next loop. So it's kind of making a stitch and a knot at the same time, and then same here, as close to this seam as you can. Through the first loop, through the next loop, and pull. And that's it. And you would just cut the thread here. And I don't have the other elastic sewn right now, but say this one was sewn back here, you're just gonna do the exact same thing then. You'd fold your ribbon, put that down here, flip this elastic back here, cross it over, and you're gonna sew this one down on that side. And then you have your X that's gonna go over their ankle, and then their ribbons on each side. So that's how I would sew them for somebody who's brand new to Pointe, and then I'll show you how I would do it for someone who's been on Pointe for a year or more, unless they prefer the crisscross straps. Some people prefer the crisscross straps because it's just a little extra support. If you have really high arches, really flexible feet, flexible ankles, you can always do crisscross straps because the ribbon's gonna hide them anyway, and it's just gonna give you a little extra support. Okay, so this is how we would do it with just one elastic. So you have your elastic cut, so it's gonna be nice and snug around, just around the ankle. And what I find easier is to just turn this inside out because I'm gonna just sew through the inside of the shoe. So I'm gonna put it down on a diagonal, from where the seam is here to where this seam is in the back, not the center seam, but you can see it's kind of like a double seam there. So on an angle, so it's nice and far down the shoe, so it really helps to keep the heel on their heel. And then I'm just gonna go around these 3 sides. So I'm gonna start here. I'm only gonna go through the suede and the elastic. And I'm just gonna do a little whip stitch all the way around through the suede and elastic. And then on this next stitch, I'm gonna tie my first knot. So you're making like a stitch and a knot at the same time. Through this loop and through the next loop, and pull, and here. Through this loop, and through this loop. And pull. And that's it. And now you can see, because it's sewn so far down in the shoe, it's gonna really hold the shoe to their foot and be nice and snug. So I would cut this, flip it over to the other side, turn it inside out again so it's easier for me to see, and sew it the same way on this side, going down one side, across the bottom, and up across the other. We're gonna fold the bottom up twice. So 1, and again 2. And that's just to make it more secure so that it's not, when you just sew through this one layer here, and this is sewn tight and this is pulling and pulling and pulling constantly, it can pull right off the shoe. So if you just do this little flip over once or twice, then you have a little bit more stability there, where every time they tie them and go up and down, that it's not gonna rip right off the shoe. So I just fold it over twice. I lay it sort of right up against where that seam is, a little bit in front. You can see it's just a little bit crossing over. It's just about halfway along the shoe. I hold it down with my thumb, and then all I'm gonna do is go through just the suede part of the shoe, not all the way through, and then through the ribbon. Same thing again, I'm not gonna go all the way through the shoe, just through the suede and through the ribbon. And just sort of whip stitch it all the way around. And then I'm gonna use my last 2 stitches to make my knots. Which is definitely a little bit harder when your thread is this long. Mine's a little bit long. Through one loop, through the next loop, and pull. Same thing, I'm gonna do one more. I always do 2 knots. There we go. Cut it, leave a little bit of space at the end. And that's it. And then we would do the same on the other side. So you have 1 loop of elastic in the back and 1 ribbon on each side. And that's it. And then once they tie them for the first time around their ankles, you're gonna wanna trim the ends of this, because it's gonna be a little bit too long, and you only wanna have about maybe that much left to tuck in once they're tied. So after they have them tied around their ankles, you're gonna trim them, so there's only about that much extra, and then you're gonna take the lighter, and you're just gonna lightly go across the edges. And all that does is make just like a little edge so it doesn't unravel. And that's it.